Hello, Econ students, and welcome to the last lecture of the year. Our topic today is economic growth. These are our 7 topics for today. Most, but not all, were covered in your reading. Are you ready? Let's go. We begin with sources of economic growth. For economic growth, a key ingredient is actually productivity. Productivity is measured as output per worker. So in order to have economic growth, we need a steady increase in productivity. So rather than talking about sources of economic growth, we will actually talk about sources of productivity, which cause growth. They're listed to the right, and I will go over each one in turn. The first source is physical capital, which is equipment used by firms to make goods and services. Another way of thinking about it is that physical capital is stuff that helps us make more stuff. Here's an example. We have a farmer with a shovel and farmer with no shovel. Holding all other factors constant, which farmer will have higher productivity? Obviously, it's the farmer with the shovel. Our second source is the level of human capital. It is defined by the knowledge and skills of the workforce, and it's attained through education, worker training, and experience. A great concrete example of human capital are literacy levels. Countries with higher literacy levels tend to have a more productive workforce. So basically, increases in human capital lead to an increase in productivity, which spur economic growth. Our third source is technology, which are the technical means for producing goods and services. One necessary requirement for an economy to have good technology is the presence of R&D, which stands for research and development. I'll explain why with a historical example I learned at Northwestern in a history class about the Industrial Revolution. As someone who isn't great with numbers, it was actually cool that this history class about economic growth counted towards my econ major, yet I didn't have to do any calculations for this class. Probably sounds like a nightmare to you numbers-oriented people out there, but here we go. Guess for me, in which country did the first Industrial Revolution take place? Here's a hint. This country has been a consistent ally to the US owing to our common language and common systems of government. The answer is Britain. Why? Well, in Britain, private wealthy citizens were happy to fund research and development, whereas other contemporary countries like France did not have wealthy citizens spending their money on research and development. Basically, science doesn't develop if there's weak research and development funding. Scientists need money to fund their work. Let me bring this back to our topic. If we want improvements in physical capital, this first source of growth, and technology, the third source of growth, our economy must have investment spending. So this means we spend money on capital goods like machinery, technology, and education instead of consumption goods like Supreme clothing and Timberland boots. And how is investment financed? By savings. So this brings us to the market for loanable funds, which brings together savers and borrowers. So when people save their money, it is then available to be lent out for investment. This savings can come from within our country in the form of domestic savings or from abroad like China, where there is a newly wealthy class of people and businesses with boatloads of money to invest in the US. So here's a quick recap. If you want good physical capital and good technology, then you need high domestic savings rates and or investment from abroad in order to have productivity growth and therefore economic growth. Our fourth and last resources are natural resources, which is what we harvest from the earth. Throughout history, natural resources played an important role in economic growth. Countries with arable, which means fertile, land had higher GDP. And this fact is actually the basis for economist Thomas Malthus's theory about natural resources and their effect on the economy. Let's take a look at it. Look at this graph. The green line shows food required to support a population, while the gold line supports food production. Are food production and food requirements growing at a linear or an exponential rate? Take a second to look and think about it. So, as you can see, food production grows at a constant linear rate, but food requirements grow at an exponential rate. So, according to Malthus, eventually resources like food will run out, which lead to things like starvation, disease, or war as people fight over scarce resources. This is what's called the Malthusian death point or the catastrophe point. In modern times, Malthusian economics is not as applicable because we've got better technology that has helped us adapt our resources to our growing population. I promise that was our longest topic. Let's move on to topic 2, diminishing returns. We need to understand diminishing returns in order to understand the aggregate production function. Diminishing marginal returns should sound familiar to you because I basically taught you this in Unit 1. Do you remember an activity where I had 2 volunteers eat one M&M at a time and chart how much happiness each M&M gave them? The result, in theory, was that the first few M&Ms make you pretty happy, but by the 9th or 10th M&M, you start to feel less happy with each successive M&M because it's too much sugar. So when we eat M&Ms, there comes a point where diminishing marginal utility sets in, and each successive unit brings us less and less happiness. And we can apply the same concept to the sources of growth. Each additional unit of physical capital or a natural resource actually has a point where we derive less and less productivity. Consider the simulation that we normally would have done in class. In this simulation, you're now a robot and you work at the Jund paper chain factory, and you will make paper chains for me. We will graph how productive you robots are. And here's the catch. My factory only has 1 pair of scissors and 1 roll of tape, and your factory space is only the width of 2 desks pushed together. First, we will start with 2 robots. I bet Jet would raise his hand and so would Emma. So they are our first 2 robots. And they have 30 seconds to make as long a paper chain as possible. You guys have 30 seconds. Go! Okay, looks like they've made 3 links in 30 seconds. Why don't we get them an assistant? Oh, Nathan, thank you for volunteering. Nathan joins as the 3rd robot. You have 30 seconds. Go. All right, as a group of 3, they've made 4 links. They've started to specialize. So Emma cuts the strips out, Jet bends the strips into a circle, and Nathan tapes everything into place. But Nathan still basically has 2 jobs since he has to rip the tape off and then tape everything together. So let's add a 4th robot. Oh, hey, Ryan, thanks for volunteering. You guys have 30 seconds. Go. So as a group of 4, they're able to make 6 links. Whoa. Ryan was able to help Nathan with taping because now Ryan can be just in charge of ripping the tape off and simply handing the tape to Nathan, who can now focus on constructing the paper chain. Do we need a 5th worker? Well, let's give it a shot. Oh, hey, Alon. Thanks for volunteering. You guys have 30 seconds. Go! Oh, no. Alon doesn't have anything to do. The group stays at 6 links. You know what? Just for kicks, let's add another robot. I need a volunteer. Thanks for volunteering, Andrew Fan. It's time you put that DECA experience to good use. You guys have 30 seconds. Go. Oh no. It looks like the 6th robot actually caused your productivity to go down to only 5 links because there's no space on the factory floor. Andrew actually got in the way of production. Andrew Fan, are you sure you should major in business at U of I? I'm just kidding. Or am I? All right, to recap, inputs like physical capital and natural resources have diminishing returns. And this helps explain the shape of the aggregate production function, which we'll talk about now. So here's our 3rd topic, the aggregate production function. And here's a general definition. The aggregate production function shows output, or real GDP, as a function of various inputs, or in this case, the 4 sources of growth. So the APF shows diminishing returns to physical capital and natural resources. That's why it's shaped like a curve that begins to grow, but eventually tapers off as more and more inputs are added, but don't provide more productivity. So look at the graphs on the right. The x-axis represents inputs, and the y-axis represents output, or real GDP. The APF shifts up when there are improvements in technology and human capital. And so there you have it. That is the aggregate production function. Here's our 4th topic, real GDP per capita. You calculate it by dividing our country's GDP by the population of the country. So GDP per capita is a great way for us to measure the standard of living for different countries. So ceteris paribus, if we have population growth, it reduces our standard of living. Think of it this way. If your family has a fixed income of $100,000, your standard of living would be higher if you had one sibling compared to having 8 siblings, because the quality of your Christmas or Hanukkah gifts are way better if there are only 2 siblings compared to 8, ceteris paribus. So GDP per capita also allows us to compare the standard of living between 2 countries or multiple countries. So here's a hypothetical example. Take Britain and Australia, for example. Fun fact, Australia was once originally a penal colony for Britain. Basically, prisoners were shipped off to Australia, which explains why the Australian accent sounds so similar to the British accent. So look at the numbers and tell me, which country's citizens have a higher standard of living? Well, if you did the calculation correctly, the answer is Australia, since their GDP per capita is higher. So even though in this example Britain has a higher GDP, they have a lower GDP per capita than does Australia. On to our 5th topic, the rule of 70. Hey guys, we're more than halfway done. Rather than put my dad joke or funny meme slide at the end this time, I decided to put it in the middle. My pick today is a post my brother made during his senior year of college, and I thought you all, especially my seniors, would appreciate it. My brother said that awkward moment when your teacher emails you saying that you've been doing well in class, but then says, it'll be my pleasure to make it more challenging for you. Hashtag what? Hashtag can we not? Hashtag just trying to graduate, which I feel like you seniors are trying to do right now. Okay, back to the rule of 70. Here's the formula for it. You use it to figure out how long it will take a variable to double. It's often used in finance for a variety of numbers and not just in macroeconomics to measure economic growth. But definition, it's just how long a variable will double depends on 70 divided by its growth rate. So let's do an example. If real GDP has an annual growth rate of 2%, how many years will it take for real GDP to double? Well, you just take 70 and divide it by 2, so the answer is 35 years. Say hello to our 6th topic, the production possibilities function, or production possibilities curve. If it sounds familiar, that's good. I'm about to show you a slide you saw on January 23rd during class, and I had you turn and talk to a partner, so let's see what you remember. So turn and talk to your partner. So first question, what is typically on each axis? The answer is 2 different goods. In the past, we use an example like guns and butter. What do these graphs show? They show the trade-offs society makes when deciding what to produce, right? So we could produce all guns and no butter, or we could produce all butter and no guns, or some combination in between. Next question, what are 4 assumptions of the model? The 4 assumptions are full employment, fixed resources, fixed technology, and only 2 goods. Last question, how's your day going? Any weekend plans? You guys probably are feeling how I'm feeling. Quarantine sucks, and I hope school goes back to normal in the fall, but who knows? I've been hitting up my parents' house every weekend. I live in my hip but tiny city apartment during the week, so it's nice to have a weekend escape. Also, I can only spend about 2 to 3 days at my parents' house before I get annoyed at them, so the whole weekend deal works out well. All right, so points within the PPC mean we are underutilizing resources, and points outside it mean we are overutilizing resources. And this is actually an unattainable combination in the PPC model. And here's one last review point. Economic growth is shown by the PPC shifting outwards. And then the opposite of economic growth would be the PPC shifting inwards. And remember, it's possible for it to shift inconsistently, meaning that it could shift out along one axis, but not the other axis, depending on where improvements in growth are made. So now here's a new version of the PPC that we use to illustrate economic growth at a high level. You have new axes that are simply going to be just consumer goods versus investment goods or capital goods. So an example of consumer good would be clothing or movie tickets. Examples of investment goods would be advanced degrees and machinery. So let's practice this concept. Pretend there are 3 countries, country A, B, and C. For each country, consider their living conditions and implications for long-run growth, given where their economy is currently producing on the PPC. So look at the position of each country. Now, I want you to look at the data and pick the country, A, B, or C, that right now has a bleak and depressing, no fun life, but will definitely have long run economic growth. Hopefully, you picked country A. Now, pick the country that has a great life right now, but in the long run will likely experience depreciation of its physical capital and no long run economic growth. Hopefully, you picked country C. Now, pick the country where life is okay, it's all right, and will probably have long run economic growth. Hopefully, you picked country B. Okay, we've reached our last topic, short run versus long run growth. Basically, here's the difference. Short run growth is going to have ups and downs, and this is due to the business cycle. So, GDP and unemployment numbers typically fluctuate over time. This is short run economic growth. But long run growth is when our economy generally rises over time, where that GDP is rising over time. Here's a great graph that illustrates short run versus long run growth. So, historically, our economy has had its ups and downs, as illustrated by the blue squiggly line. Do you see, though, how in a 20-year period, there are ups and downs? But also, over this 20-year period, our GDP typically trends upwards along that black line. That black line is long run growth. My dear students, we are done. Congrats.